Good afternoon. Thank you, everybody, for joining today. As the introducer said, my name is Tia, and I'm going to let the panel introduce themselves, so we'll start off with Sunny.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Sonny, managing partner of Cultivators out of the Netherlands. We help the growers and investors from actually business ID towards cultivation and cultivation support. That's in short what we do.
My name is Lucas Targos. I am the VP of Controlled Environment Ag at Urban Grow. I formerly was a commercial vegetable grower, turned to cannabis grower, and now have worked for Urban Grow for about 8 years. We really specialize in full design build projects, specifically on cultivation facilities.
Hello, my name is Sabrina Carvalho, and I am the cannabis specialist developing R&D for Philips Lighting.
Hi everyone, I'm Darren Kaplan. I'm a senior consultant for Sustanza Global. We're a consulting company that focuses on the design and operation of cannabis facilities around the world, and we're based in Canada. And my background's academia and also a grower, so kind of both the science and the practical aspect of growing.
Wonderful, good afternoon. My name is Timo. I'm the general manager of Fluence. Fluence is a horticultural lighting company, and we are all happy to be here.
Excellent. Thanks, Timo. So chatting about innovations in cannabis cultivation is obviously a very large topic. So we wanted to kind of start off talking with the very early phases of development, which is propagation and tissue culture. So we'll start off with what are some of the major advancements that you've seen, maybe in the last year or so, in that field of both sourcing fantastic genetics and the technologies that we can use to ensure that we have a great start to the grow.
Well, maybe I give it a start. I'll take advantage.
Ladies first.
Well, one of the advances that actually we ourselves worked on is on recipes specifically used for propagation and tissue culture. So currently we have rolled out the recipes of LEDs specific to improve propagation. We managed to improve propagation in all aspects of it, from speeding when it's difficult, from situations like Germany where you cannot use rooting hormones. It is a challenge. We created recipes for that growers can use, and we find that we are, well, at least that one we are very proud of bringing to the market. But genetics, indeed, also very important. Working with breeders is very important. Having bad genetics for rooting can kill your business. So yes, choose wisely if you go for it now, I would say, is also very important.
On my side, I would say that we're seeing a lot more of desire to have tissue culture labs and practices within the facilities on the early stages. It's definitely become an evolution, and a lot more standards around tissue culture for cannabis specifically, which I think it's very good. And I think as most people know, there's certain viruses that are kind of working their way through the industry right now, and tissue culture provides a very helpful safety net in that. So I think that whether it's a retrofit or you're looking at building your first facility, allocating that space to some sort of tissue culture lab can de-risk a lot within the facility, and then also provide that genetic security there as well too.
And maybe in addition that you also have the possibility to have the backup at another location, right? So from a business model, it makes you a little bit more resilient, and if you have a problem that you have maybe somewhere backup. So I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, because if you outsource it, what a lot of people try to do is the risk for getting something in from the supplier you buy it from. So that is for me always a risk factor. Have it on your own. You can really preserve that things go wrong, like getting a latent off variant in, for example.
In a way, tissue culture, nowadays when I talk to growers, many of us, we create varieties that we love. They are unique to us. And we find that is amazing variety that I managed to create, right? Tissue culture, to me, for this type of love for a specific variety, for whatever reason you like it, is your safety net. You can have it now, and in 10 years from now. You can always go back to it. It's safe. So I find that at least for even from the most unique varieties to scale up production, tissue culture has its place for this aspect of innovation. You can always go back to it. Many of the growers that we talk to, they actually say, oh, the variety that I had or that somebody had and that we lost. Tissue culture will, even in the future, can you imagine having a library of a collection of breeds that
I can.
100 years ago somebody used and we can still look at it?
And it's becoming
Please, yes,
more and more important this past couple of years with
very much, yes.
You mentioned the virus. The hop latent viroid is probably one of the biggest concerns with cannabis growers right now. And in Canada specifically, it's maybe 90% of the facilities, I've heard numbers around there, are infected. And once your genetics are infected, if your mother's stock is infected, there might not even be a way of getting rid of it. So
No, yeah,
having
true.
tissue culture reserves is kind of one of your only ways of really securing your genetics. So.
Yeah, I believe tissue culture is the only way to rid the facility of it. And it's a very scary virus, too, because it's, from what we're seeing right now, stable even in water, which is...
That's right.
Yes.
And even traditional tissue culture, if you're doing nodal culture, it's not effective.
Yeah.
So you need to be doing meristem culture, which takes a long time,
Yeah.
and it doesn't always work. So
Yep.
starting with clean stock,
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's less of a fear tactic and more of a reality check.
necessity.
Yes. Backups.
Yeah, when we started seeing tissue culture in Canada in 2018, I worked at one of the earliest tissue culture facilities. It was just an internal lab for ourselves, but it was very hot and heavy at that time. Everyone was very interested, and then everyone got a little bit less excited about it because it's not a fully proven method. It's not cookie cutter, copy and paste. I can't just take my protocols and use them for the 700 cultivars you want to work with. So it requires a lot of time, effort, and expertise, which is something that was not as readily available in the industry, and money. You know, it's not something that you can just pump a couple $100,000 into and be for sure guaranteed all of the cultivars are going to work. So that's been really interesting for me to see in the last year or two is kind of the rise of tissue culture again, because it's become an absolute necessity. Using a continual mother clone system indefinitely with no backup and having cannabis grown at a commercial level where it's never been grown before and hasn't been bred specifically for resistances to a variety of pests and viruses. It means that it's something that everyone should be looking at in their cultivation strategy. If you're not, it's very risky. Like Sabrina said, you could breed something for a very long time, have a fantastic genetic, and then lose it in the matter of a few months. So I think that's a really big area that I'm glad to see Europe, actually, I feel has been more on the forefront of that. There are very few European clients that I have that have not already begun their strategy with tissue culture, either internally or looking for somebody to source it and do it externally. So I think that's been a really big improvement. Along the lines of kind of moving past our tissue culture and propagation phase, moving into kind of cultivation, a mix of both veg and flower. There's a number of questions there. One I wanted to start off with is environmental sustainability. So as we all know, cannabis is bashed very often for not being the most environmentally sustainable industry, especially when you're doing indoor cultivation, which is predominantly what I work in. It's very power heavy. And those of us in Europe who have felt the increase in power prices in the last year, we can really attest to that. So I wanted to know if anyone has seen anything very interesting along the lines of more environmental sustainability in basically any of your flower cultivation projects.
Yes. And I think that Sonny at least can also say that yes.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah, for sure.
Let's put it this way. I don't know a lot about other regions, but in European Union you have two things. One is the rules of a country and then the rules of European Union. We all know that European Union will become more strict on how much energy we can spend. Whether we like it or not, we need to be sustainable growing our crops independent of what it is. The Netherlands, for example, is already starting to apply that and planning to apply it even more fiercely. And we are talking about situations where they say we will only support with subsidies or discounts or whatever else if you fulfill this energy gap. If you go over it, you will not be supported. You will not. And can you imagine, everybody here is going to kill me for that, but doesn't matter. Tomato right now, high crop, yes. The Netherlands is putting sustainable measures of if you want to be supported, you will need to be within this energy gap. And every single grower that has been doing this for years is asking, how do we even hit this target? if they would put anywhere near to that target to cannabis right now, we would be in trouble. So we all need to start thinking of our projects, of how can we make it more sustainable in numbers, not even for spending less money of ours, but accounting already that if you're going to do that in Europe, you will have these coming sooner or later. So we better prepare to how low can we go with our energies and so on to get a good crop, a balanced crop. What can we do together to lower it? Because they will come, these rules will come. It's just a matter of time. And for us, if we can get on the front line of saying, we know how low we can get, and European Union can say, okay, hopefully soon they will say, we will listen and we will consider those. If we can have that influence, great. That's how I see it. European Union will always come with rules on that, sooner or later, yeah.
But it's not only the energy, it's also water.
Yes.
Like in Netherlands, we already have in the horticultural world the zero emission law by 2027. So from that moment, growers cannot discharge any water anymore. So all the water they are using and coming back from drain, they need to disinfect and reuse. So it's not only the energy part where you guys with Fluence and Philips work on and reducing the energy costs. It is also all the other sources we use to grow our plants.
And it's not really a common practice for cannabis growers to recirculate.
No.
It's not.
No.
It's complicated, and also with the way that cannabis growers have learned to grow with specific brands of fertilizer and products. If you're recirculating your nutrient solution, you have to readjust specific elements, and it's not an easy thing to do if you don't understand each component of your fertilizer that you're using. So I think it's a lot of learning and a lot of learning from what's happening in Europe and in the Netherlands, because it's been happening for a long time.
Yeah. So we work on the wastewater management side a lot, and it's been a long road. And I think the biggest difficulty is that in a lot of cannabis fertilizer regimens, you see two things that are very difficult from a recirculation is high heavy metals and a lot of organic materials, which make UV not as effective to get the transmission through. So we've had to really play around with a lot of different technologies. Mainly, I would say the one that is really making moves through the entire horticulture industry is ozone. As a very well way of disinfecting water. And then we also talk about a lot on the condensate recapture as well too. So recapturing all the condensate that's being produced from the HVAC from the facility, and utilizing some pretty simple ways. Believe it or not, that is very clean water, but it's so clean, it's too clean. So it's very easy to end up getting biological growth within there. So it's something that I think is going to be a large part of the evolution of the industry, because as you mentioned, with a recirculating system, there's a lot of commercial horticulture practices that need to be taken place in order to have those systems operate properly. I will say that we've been able to kind of make a hybrid and a lot of times bring in more of a blending system to where we're actually blending that recirculation with a direct inject system to allow us to kind of have a happy medium, right?
Semi-closed.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, to add on that, I think that, for example, nowadays, cannabis growers focus indeed on breeding to specific niche choices of looks, smells, and so on. But I think that the true innovation will come when we mix that with efficiency, choosing the varieties that also bring the efficiency into account. We can have really nice varieties, but we have to have the notion that they are very expensive to run. We have clients asking us, I am from light, but we have clients asking us to actually increase light to a light level to achieve a yield that they want with this particular variety, while we prefer to actually look at it and ask, can we breed something similar, but that operates at a reasonable level? Because we can't keep going higher and higher. Even biologically, these plants cannot take everything. They are amazing plants. They are very flexible, but they cannot take everything. And one of the things that also clients of ours and of all of us are suffering from is that technology is advancing. Many of these breeds, they were bred for sunlight, for HPS, for whatever it was being used in each region. And LEDs are a technology that pushes these plants much harder. is unique, but breeds need to keep up with that. We have technology sometimes that for us is innovative, but is waiting for the other innovations to come in. Breeding is one of those. We only now are starting. It's whether we like it or not, for this capacity and scale up, we only now are starting on the efficiency of having good crops that can handle a reasonable level. So I think that breeding will change a lot of the techniques and will help a lot of the technologies that we have and that we are developing work better as well. But yeah, working with breeders is important on that as well, I would say.
Maybe a comment, Lucas, you mentioned about heavy metals, that can be also a problem. I think that also starts with making the right choices for your starting water, your fertilizers, so use high quality brands for fertilizers and for substrates so that you don't get it into a system. Yeah, and then I agree, if you have it, then it's difficult to get out of it, of course.
Yeah, and I think there's been, luckily has been definitely a movement around from where we were back in the day of, shelf bought liquid fertilizers that are extremely expensive. Not that I'm bashing on them, but there's a better route, right? And you get better quality, better consistency, and you'll see that both in the product, but also in your systems, just in everyday use.
Yeah, and so from facility design, that's super important. So when you are designing your cannabis facility, I think everyone knows in this industry, it's really important to be flexible. And it's really important to understand, even if you're in an emerging market, there are more developed markets, Canada being an example, certain countries in Europe, where you can look at the lessons learned and make sure that you have the ability to pivot. That's what I always encourage my clients to do, have the ability to be flexible and malleable as the market progresses. And so with your facility design, I have a client and they did, direct, water to waste because they said their water was really cheap. And I said, it's not about just the price of the water that you make these decisions. That's not the guiding force. And surprise, surprise, the government has now said that they cannot put all of their water into waste, but we don't have any space to put a recirculating system. So this is one of the fun little challenges, but it's really important to work with really experienced developers for facilities that will tell you your options and let you know why you should do these things and why you should have these options available. But not only water and power, we were just talking about the things you actually put into your product. So cannabis is very garbage in, garbage out. If you don't use good quality lights, if you don't use good quality substrate, fertilizers, etc., you don't get, I would say, the robustness of that genetic. You're really not doing yourself any favors. You're not getting the full capacity. So there's also been a lot of questions regarding substrates in particular and the environmental sustainability of things like rock wool and cocoa peat and things along those lines. So have you had a lot of clients or any projects that you've been working on where you found that you're kind of battling with them about making the more sustainable choice for their own kind of betterment in the long term, but they're kind of maybe hung up on a practice they've had previously and not really willing to let it go?
9 out of 10.
Yeah.
I think cannabis is pretty good on the, let's say for cocoa, for example. A lot of cannabis growers are pushing for cocoa ahead of really having to make those decisions. A lot of rockwool growers still, but compared to, let's say, other crops, I think there are a lot of progressive thinking cannabis growers that really do want to push the sustainability. And the substrate is usually the first thing that they'll go with, LEDs and the substrate. And
I would like to say that the struggle is not the material you're using. Many materials that, at a certain scale, one substrate that you're using can be the best substrate you have. But if you're moving to scale up, or if you're moving to a different way of growing, if you're applying a different technology, and with that technology, you could have the problem that that substrate is no longer the best solution for that. We need to understand is that many of us, whether we are doing for recreational small scale, recreational bigger scale, medicinal this and that, clubs and so on, there are products that work very well now for a particular system, that having this project insisting that they will continue with that product towards the other system, and we can't change that. My lights cannot fix the choice of you choosing to go with that particular substrate. It's not fair to the substrate, it's not fair to the lights, or it's not fair to the irrigation system you chose. We have to be very careful with the choices we do, with the combinations we do. Please if you would come to me and I would say with my lights, I know from experience with other clients that we had that they are applying this same method, they have a hard time with it, you would please consider something else. We can even tell you, well, you can talk to this person, that person, that person. Please, we can't fix that. It's literally that. And many of these innovations, they work on the right place. Many of these innovations are coming, they work for their place. Don't try to push it to work everywhere else. They have a place for a reason. So many of these, I believe that is more about the balance of where they work best, not that they are wrong or that they don't work at all.
I think if you look to substrates, we all know that we can grow in all type of substrates, but clearly in the medicinal market in Europe, you see a movement and a trend towards stone wool. Why? Because it's clean and inert, and you start uniform, and that is always more difficult if you grow in soil or cocoa peat because it's the mixture. So having from one pot to another pot exact the same is more difficult. It's just logical. So therefore you see a movement for clean inert product with stone wool. I think, Timo, you also see that everywhere. Like in Germany, they were talking even for the 3 medicinal license holders, the only way is stone wool because of that.
You're absolutely right. So, because it's mainly a medical market, obviously the product quality and stability is extremely important. And with rockwool, you have a clean starting point. But still, the rockwool issue is an issue. What do we do afterwards? That is, you brought it up at the beginning. The question was about sustainability. So there is a question unanswered. We answer one question, safe product for the patients. We don't answer the question what to do with the waste product.
Yeah, you have in the Netherlands, but that's only in the Netherlands. Yes. So you're not going to transport, if you grow in Germany, all your stone wool end product to the Netherlands for that recycling solution. So it's also a matter of having sufficient volume where all the growers are to have this in place. But you're right, that is at this moment a tricky point.
But I think that's also an opportunity for people to see that there's gaps within recycling programs, right? Yeah. And there's a big use for it, right? So those markets that need them, I mean, it's a great area to look into.
Yeah, you are entitled, if you are working now or even if you're developing a project, you are entitled to ask every single company, what is your disposal techniques, protocols, do you have it? Can you receive it back? What is the recycling program? All of that, just ask. It needs to fit into your guidelines. It's like, is a waste. You need to get rid of it, if it is circular economy or not. We have a lot of cocoa developments. They are improving a lot and developing a lot as well, because exactly that. They are challenged. They need to keep up with the techniques, even for cannabis. We see a lot of these substrates, irrigation systems and so on, improving a lot. And I find that more often than not, if you ask companies that are doing this job and that they are working fiercely to improve, they will give you an answer of where they are in that stage. They will have no problems addressing the fact that they will say, in your region, we have no capacity to do that. And it's fine. It's just fine. If you have in your region someone that is capable of doing that now, good. But sometimes even the companies take it as, is it a good challenge? Challenge the companies to do that and ask them to do that. Most of the times they will be honest enough to say, well, it will take us a couple of years, but we accept the fact that this is a new challenge for us. Sometimes we even are the ones telling exactly, please be prepared, because we foresee that in the next 3 years something is going to happen. So if you cannot prepare for that, then we can't do it anymore. So ask, talk, interact. If you don't like the answer, just say it, that you didn't like that and that you want something better. We are all working for improving, even in our own innovations. Sometimes I have an idea that I think is great and everybody looks at me, that is great but expensive. And I was like, okay, I need to make it cheaper. Okay, how to fix that, right? We like the challenges because if we don't talk and interact, we don't make it better.
I agree, and I think that we touched on something here, which is that to do medical grade cannabis is not the most sustainable practice, because the most sustainable way to grow cannabis is to put it in a field outside. But then you have this like large level of variability between the crops, so you're not really meeting kind of that tolerance limit you want for your C of A's. we like growing in rock wool for many of my clients because it's inert, because it's clean, because it's something that we can get consistent CFAs on and make sure that it's always the same every single time. But that's a bigger conversation that I think the European Union needs to discuss. You want sustainable practices, but you also want super consistent products. So how are we going to find ways to meet in the middle, or how are we going to work with different companies in the space to make more improvements along those lines? Because we all want to be more sustainable, but we also have to meet these very strict requirements that you have for our cultivation and production. One area I'm seeing a lot of really cool innovations in, which is the most interesting area for me. We spend so much time in cultivation, and then for me, post-harvest is always very fascinating, because I always tell people you can spend 10 to 12 weeks on a crop and you can ruin it in a matter of days in a dry room by, having a mold overgrowth or something else. So that's been a really big area of innovation, and I'll pass it over to the panel as well to discuss a little bit about that. But one point I wanted to touch on was microbial remediation, which is a very hot topic, because coming from Canada, we use pretty much irradiation and e-beaming for everybody. But you guys don't really have as many options here, and there's not as many licenses available, and Europe's not a single country. It's not something that you can easily move the product between borders. So I've been seeing a lot of things on the floor and some private conversations, but I wanted to know what your best guess is for the next big wave of microbial remediation technology in Europe.
That's a very good question. Coming from Canada, where, as many people know, it's very strict in terms of microbial standards and thresholds. First off, it's definitely possible not to have to remediate, which is even meeting those strict thresholds. If you're growing, let's say you're using an inert media, you have a very highly controlled environment with good air filtration, you have sanitary practices. If you do all those things, it's very possible, and you can do it consistently, not having to remediate, which there are so many remediation methods out there. I'm not even familiar with all of them. There's probably new ones that you guys know of that I haven't heard of, but e-beam, for example, or irradiation, it has an effect, whether or not it's huge, on product quality, and it also has some stigma associated with it. There's radiation going into the product, so some buyers don't like that, or some consumers might not like that idea, and so it's possible to avoid it altogether with just the proper practices. Yep. But I'd like to hear more about what's out there.
Maybe what I think is really important, that because in cultivation we often talk about climate, this discussion is sometimes not so happening in the drying phase. It's like, if you talk about microclimates and so on, is it really understood how vertically my temperature, humidity, etc. is? It's not really, and it's also not measured, so the sensors are partly not installed. And I think, as you said in the question, there is so much potential to make it right. So give it the time it needs, have it under control. I think there you not necessarily need really high tech. You need just sensors, dashboard, look at it, something out of balance, correct. So it can be pretty easy as well, but have it under control. And I think we always know, relatively high drying rooms. And if you go through the room, you feel already the differences. And if we feel it already, then it's an issue, for sure.
So, yeah. So I think I would agree with that, is that I think there's a lot of different tools from a technology standpoint for reducing microbials. But I think really what it comes down to is your climate, your environment within that room. And I think there's a disconnect that we see right now in terms of people's strategy around sequencing of climate set points within those dry rooms during the drying period. Personally, I can't speak for everyone, but for myself, what I've seen the most success in is touching the plant as least as possible during that harvesting into the dry room phase. And then it's really, you could need to be very strategic in terms of your climate within that room during really the first 3 to 4 days are the most critical. And there's a big misconception around moisture content and water activity, and those are two very, very important things. They come from really the food industry around drying foods and microbials in foods, but they hold very, very true to cannabis. So that's what I would say that is the two biggest things, is focusing on climate sequencing on those first 3 to 4 days within the room. How much moisture are you ripping out of that product, having the least amount of touches on it, and then understanding water activity. How does water actually move within this product during that drying phase?
To add to that, I think that even we don't breed for post-harvest, for example. For me, it was fascinating when I started in cannabis, and suddenly it's like, okay, let's harvest and I started seeing the methods of hang dry, for example. This plant is not uniform at all. You have small flowers, big flowers, even bigger flowers, all hanging on the same plant, plants on top of plants. We've seen methods of people even pushing plants on top of plants to dry them all, and just all of this is a problem. Just the basic techniques is a problem. And then for me, in an innovation, is really asking these questions of how can, for this type of methods, what are the best plants to do with this method? If you have a crop where you have this discrepancy of flowers, you will always have problems, no matter how even good your climate is, probably, because some of these flowers are already dry and the other ones are still with moisture. And it is a big challenge. For example, I work with plants for years and I find cannabis, post-harvest like that, very challenging. It's very challenging. With all the techniques of not touching and so on, just the unique aspect of dry hanging is a challenge. And this is actually a challenge that I find very specific to cannabis. Because in many fruits and in many vegetables, you actually chop it apart or you put the fruits separate and so on. And suddenly, in many aspects of it, cannabis doesn't do that. And for that aspect is unique. I find that this challenge to how can we improve on this for this particular method is something that not that many people are looking at, because it's very unique to cannabis. And I find it an interesting challenge, but also not the cheapest one to go at this point, to be honest. Is research and development in cannabis is expensive.
If you look to the drying methods, it's also depending on what market are you serving. Are you
Yes.
going for dry flower, or is your market extracts? Yeah, then it becomes a completely different ballgame, of course, and you know all about it, of course.
Yeah.
I think that's what is really interesting about cannabis. So coming from agriculture previously, and one of the jobs I had before I started consulting, I managed a 1 million square foot cannabis greenhouse. That is a very unique situation. Your 36,000 plant harvest, your 2,500 kilos pumping through a post-harvest process in 6 days. It's a lot. And it's very difficult for you to, and we were partially owned by a vegetable grower, a very large one. And I always remember him really focusing on cultivation being the most important part of this process, because that's what they're used to. Their post-harvest is pull it down, wash it, and put it into a container. That's all they do. And they weren't understanding why we had to have so much labor and so much time in this part. And that, if I was actually strapped for labor during COVID, I was putting them more in post-harvest than in cultivation. For me, missing a small step in cultivation was way better than having a bunch of product I couldn't dry down because we couldn't bring it down in time. So we're able to take a lot of innovations from the agriculture industry for cultivation, but not so many for post-harvest, because it's so unique to cannabis. And the cannabis product itself is really heavily reliant upon standards that were set in the legacy market as to what is considered good bud or top cola, explaining to pharmaceutical auditors that the bigger buds are more desirable, even though they have the same trichome density and effect as the smaller buds, is a very complicated thing to explain. But it's because, regardless of the fact that we're a medical market, we come from a very long-standing legacy market. I want to thank everybody for all your contributions today and the great panel. I just want to leave the last couple of minutes in case anybody has any questions for anyone on the panel.
Fantastic. Let's hear it again for Tia and everybody. Are there questions? Michael's running like he sees someone holding it. There you go. All right.
Hi, I'm Rocky Petrullo with a Colombian Grow operation. And tissue culture you talked about earlier, we're trying to utilize that in our farm in Colombia. And there's a question that I've had for a while, is that the DEA came out with the seeds don't have THC, so you can mail them. Can you mail a plantlet in a test tube across borders, across countries? Is that possible?
It's going to depend on the regulations. If you want to send it to the Netherlands, no. Tissue is a plant, a seed, bear with us. A seed is not a plant. The moment it has a tissue out of that seed is a plant. So tissue culture is a plant in the Netherlands, for example. So you be very diligent on checking the regulations of the country, because some countries might not consider tissue culture a plant, and others will. And if that plant crosses all of those borders, it will be stuck on the country that actually considers that a plant.
So it
So
doesn't
be
matter.
very, very careful.
It doesn't matter that it doesn't have any THC.
It doesn't matter.
Okay.
If
For
your
example,
country has,
speaking for the Dutch, that I find unique on that sense, it's like it doesn't matter the THC level. Is a plant, cannabis tissue is a plant, therefore no. So yes, be careful. Yeah. Do you know in other countries if these rules function the same as in the Netherlands? I think it depends on the.
Depends on the country.
Yeah.
You could just send it to my house. I'm a citizen of the world. Well, you've taught them everything, apparently. Oh, what? Wait. Oh, up there. Go, Michael. Let's hear it for Michael Knotes. Walking all the stairs.
Hi, my name is Christina. I'm a cannabis educator. You were speaking about sustainability, so I was wondering if you could comment on growing in living soil and using mycorrhizal inoculants for plant health. I know that would probably introduce more variability, but I just want to hear your thoughts. Thank you.
Yeah, so ironically enough, my background is actually in regenerative ag. So I was very much a hippie in my upbringing. But the difficulty that I see, both even coming from regenerative ag into the cannabis industry, is scalability. That I think that living soil is really it's a great solution to a lot of things, but it is very tough to make it feasible at scale, right? And I think there's some hybrid systems that we can find within there that can kind of meet that goal, but living soil at its foundation, there's so many benefits to it, just at a commercial scale, it's very difficult to make feasible.
Yeah. To add on that, the plants have plant soil feedbacks. They communicate top to bottom. Scientifically, that is a thing. Nobody's denying that. But we use rock wools, cocos, neutral systems for scalability. Nowadays, innovation is coming into that aspect of testing, even from the root side. Not only, for example, we have all biological control protocols that exist that function really, really well. Many of these are techniques of animals and fungi and insects that actually are interactions of the plant with their system that we are bringing into the greenhouses, into the indoor facilities to balance the system out. There are very interesting innovations in that field to bring even further on. But that also takes time because we are talking about living beings interacting with each other and understanding how that it works in scale. You will see often scientific papers coming with a new technique, with a new aspect of it that they say it works very well. There's a positive feedback that the plants will grow X amount. Please bear in mind that that was done in a scientific system, small areas, highly controlled to actually understand the mechanism of it, and then that needs a scalability. And that is where we are at with many of these. We have biostimulants coming, many of them that are coming into the market. If they are coming to the market, feel free to ask them what was tested and how did it scale up. Because then you will get the feeling of where it stands on the market compared to the scale that you have. Some things work really well at the small scale, but then at a larger scale, it dilutes. You just don't have capacity to keep it going on a large scale. But on a small scale, it works really well. Then if you have a small scale infrastructure, then it might be a good solution for you. If you have hectares of it, might not. It's not that it doesn't work, it's just that it's not scalable. So measure the solutions to the scale that you're working at. Yeah, I would suggest that, but yes.
Thank you. Let's hear it once again. We're out of time, unfortunately. That was fantastic. Tia Feruz, the entire crew. Sonny Maroon, Lucas, Sabrina,